He said I'd never work in this industry again. He was right, because I became his boss. My name is Marcus Thompson, and this is the story of how I went from being fired and humiliated to owning the company that destroyed my career. It's a story about patience, strategy, and the kind of revenge that served ice cold after 5 long years. It all started at TechFlow Solutions, a mid-sized software company where I worked as senior project manager. I'd been there for 3 years, climbing the ladder steadily, earning respect from my team and delivering results consistently. My direct supervisor was Richard Kellerman, the VP of Operations, a man who'd mastered the art of taking credit for success while deflecting blame for failure. For 2 years, I watched Richard operate. When our team successfully launched the cloud migration project 6 months ahead of schedule, Richard presented it to the board as his strategic vision. When we secured the Morrison Industries contract worth $2 million, Richard somehow became the mastermind behind the deal. I kept quiet, thinking that hard work would eventually speak for itself. I was naive. The breaking point came with Project Phoenix, a complete overhaul of our client management system. Richard had pitched an aggressive timeline to the board, promising delivery in 4 months, when the realistic timeframe was 8. He'd done this without consulting me or my team, despite the fact that we'd be handling the entire technical implementation. I tried to warn him. I prepared detailed reports showing why the timeline was impossible, outlined the risks, and proposed a more realistic schedule. Richard dismissed everything, telling me to stop making excuses and start delivering results. When I pushed back, he reminded me who signed my paychecks. So we worked. My team and I put in 16-hour days, weekends, holidays. We brought in contractors, extended budgets, and somehow managed to deliver something functional by Richard's impossible deadline. But functional wasn't perfect. And when the system had integration issues 3 weeks after launch, Richard had found his scapegoat. The meeting where I was fired is burned into my memory. Richard sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by HR and 2 board members, while I was called in and told to sit across from them like I was on trial. Richard painted a picture of gross negligence, missed deadlines, and poor project management. He had documentation, emails where he'd warned me about potential issues, reports where he'd supposedly flagged concerns, all fabricated or taken completely out of context. When I tried to defend myself, to explain the impossible timeline and the corners we'd been forced to cut, Richard looked directly at me and said those words that would fuel my determination for the next 5 years. Marcus, your inability to take responsibility for your failures shows exactly why you don't belong in this industry. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of project manager you really are. Security escorted me out that afternoon. My access was terminated. My personal items were boxed up and mailed to me. And just like that, 3 years of my professional life were erased. But Richard had made one critical mistake. He thought destroying my career would make me disappear. Instead, I started documenting everything. During my final weeks at TechFlow, when I knew something was wrong but couldn't quite put my finger on it, I'd started keeping detailed records. Every email exchange, every project timeline, every budget alteration. When I was fired, I realized I had something valuable, a complete picture of how Richard operated, and more importantly, how TechFlow's management was cutting corners that could spell serious trouble down the line. I spent the next 6 months unemployed, using that time to really analyze what I'd collected. The pattern was clear. Richard wasn't just a bad boss. He was systematically putting the company at risk. The aggressive timelines weren't just unrealistic. They were causing technical debt that was accumulating like a ticking time bomb. The budget cuts weren't strategic. They were compromising security protocols and compliance standards. Most importantly, the Morrison Industries contract that Richard took credit for had clauses that could bankrupt TechFlow if certain performance metrics weren't met long-term. When I finally found a new position at DataCore Systems, a TechFlow competitor, I came in with a unique perspective on the industry and a clear understanding of my former company's vulnerabilities. I worked harder than ever, not just to rebuild my career, but to position myself strategically. At DataCore, I was transparent about my experience at TechFlow. Well, mostly transparent. I explained that I'd been let go due to conflicts with management over unrealistic project timelines, which was true enough. What I didn't mention was how closely I'd been watching TechFlow's continued struggles in the market. Richard's management style hadn't changed. If anything, it had gotten worse. Through industry connections and public records, I could see the pattern continuing. TechFlow was winning contracts with aggressive bids and impossible timelines, then struggling to deliver. Their reputation was slowly eroding. Their best employees were leaving, and their financial position was becoming increasingly precarious. Meanwhile, I was thriving at DataCore. Within 18 months, I was promoted to Director of Strategic Operations. By year 3, I was VP of Client Relations. I wasn't just rebuilding my career. I was building something bigger. The opportunity came in year 4. TechFlow had overextended themselves on a government contract, and when they failed to meet security compliance standards, the same standards I'd warned about years earlier, they faced massive penalties and potential lawsuits. Their stock price plummeted, and suddenly they were ripe for acquisition. That's when I presented my proposal to DataCore's board, not to acquire TechFlow as a subsidiary, but to back me in a management buyout. I had the industry knowledge, the strategic vision, and most importantly, I understood exactly how to fix TechFlow's fundamental problems because I'd watched them develop in real time. The negotiation took 6 months. TechFlow's board was desperate to salvage what they could from their failing company. DataCore's board saw an opportunity to eliminate a competitor while gaining valuable contracts and infrastructure. And I saw my chance for the kind of justice that money couldn't buy. The day I walked back into TechFlow's boardroom as the new majority owner was surreal. Some faces around the table were familiar. Board members who'd sat quietly while Richard destroyed my career 5 years earlier. But one face was notably absent. Richard had been demoted 6 months earlier, moved from VP of Operations to Senior Manager after a string of project failures and client complaints. When the buyout was announced, he was in the break room getting coffee, completely unaware that his professional world was about to change forever. I called an all-hands meeting for that afternoon. Standing at the front of the conference room where I'd been humiliated years before, I introduced myself as the new owner and CEO. The shock on people's faces was palpable, but nothing compared to Richard's expression when he realized who was now signing his paychecks. I could have fired him immediately. I could have made a speech about karma and justice and how the tables had turned. Instead, I did something that I knew would be far more effective. I offered him a job. Not his old job, of course. Richard Kellerman, former VP of Operations, was offered a position as Junior Project Manager, reporting directly to the new Senior Project Manager, a brilliant woman named Sarah Chen, who I'd recruited from DataCore, specifically for her no-nonsense management style and her ability to hold people accountable for their work. The look in Richard's eyes when I made that offer was worth every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every rejection letter I'd received while rebuilding my career. He could accept the demotion and stay, or he could leave and try to find something else at his age with a resume showing a clear pattern of failure and management turnover. He stayed. For the past year, I've had the unique pleasure of conducting Richard's performance reviews. We sit in my corner office, the same corner office that used to be his, and I evaluate his work with the same attention to detail that he once used to destroy my career. The irony isn't lost on either of us. Richard now reports on his project timelines to the same man he once had escorted out by security. He now explains his failures to the same person he once blamed for his own mistakes. And every performance review ends the same way, with me reminding him that success in this industry requires accountability, something I learned the hard way. TechFlow is thriving now. We've rebuilt our reputation, retained our best talent, and landed 3 major contracts in the past 6 months. The same company that Richard nearly destroyed through his incompetence and ego is now a model of efficient project management and client satisfaction. Last month, Richard asked for a meeting to discuss a possible promotion. He'd been working hard, he said, and felt he'd proven himself worthy of more responsibility. I listened patiently, reviewed his performance metrics, and gave him the same advice he once gave me. Stop making excuses and start delivering results. As I sit here in my corner office, looking out at the city skyline and reflecting on this journey, I'm struck by how different everything looks from this perspective. The corner office looks different when you fought for every inch. Richard was right about one thing. I never did work in this industry again, because now I own it.